We live in a world filled with language. Language imparts identity, meaning, and perspective to our human community. Writers are either polluters or part of the cleanup team. Just as the language of power and greed has the potential to destroy us, the language of reason and empathy has the power to save us. Writers can inspire a kinder, fairer, more beautiful world, or invite selfishness, stereotyping, and violence. Writers can unite people or divide them. In this book show podcast, host, confidence coach Susan Axelrod asks women authors a simple question. Which kind of writer are you? She invites each guest to step into the confidence zone to proclaim how her book can inspire. If you are seeking inspiration to create your legacy, take out your pen and pad. Your book, My Time, starts now. Hello, friends. Welcome to the book show, your book, My Time. I couldn't be more delighted to be introducing an inspirational author whom I met online a few years ago. We got to know each other, as happens in online relationships, and we decided to get in real person connect through some phone calls. And I heard about her story and I heard about her book, and I ordered her book called Drawing Comfort, an art, journaling, and survival guide for people with chronic conditions. And I read that book cover to cover, even though I don't have a chronic condition. And I felt like it should be on every bookshelf, in every office, in every home on the globe, because so many people do suffer with various sorts of chronic conditions. My mind in reading this book was opened in a way that I couldn't even previously have imagined. And this is the perfect type of author with that type of inspiration I wanted to bring to this book show. So I am delighted to welcome you, Evie Lennon, to the Book Show podcast today. How are you, my friend?
I am terrific and delighted to be here. And I consider you a true healer, so it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much. We are in such synergistic energy there. Full reveal. I took a long drive recently, and while there have been times that I have supported Evie in her journey, recently she supported me in my journey. And that's how true synergy, especially healing synergy, goes. So I want to get started and jump right in with the question, what is the story behind your story of this book?
Well, I found several situations dovetailed in a way that catapulted me into a field trip of sorts. So I started writing the story because I was just trying to survive the shock of becoming disabled. It quickly evolved into something else. There were a few twists to that story. I think we all remember when there's a life-changing time in our lives, people say they know where they were when 9/11 happened, or when people like Kennedy or Dr. King were shot. I remember where I was standing in a school library. I was an art teacher, and I remember having a little difficulty swallowing. That turned into a 30-day medical leave. And that turned into a situation where I never did go back to a traditional job. But there were two twists to the story. One is I had just become a parent. I had just become a stepmother to a boy that I call correspondent in the book. And I had just adopted my baby girl, who is now about to turn 16. And both of the kids have severe medical situations. My stepson had a brain injury, a traumatic brain injury that left him with heartbreaking deficits and cerebral palsy, and my daughter had been paralyzed, also through abuse. So those three medical situations thrust me into a learning situation I never necessarily volunteered for, as far as the how magnified that became.
Wow. I have to breathe a little through the messages already shared in your story. When I started this podcast, I chose for it to be 30 minutes. And it's so hard to keep it contained because of the opportunity to discuss this very, very deep situation which you describe. So right now, I'm going to encourage people to find Evie on social media. Buy her book already. There'll be a link in the comments, of course, and get in touch with her personally if anything that she has said about this personal story has resonated with you. So I want to ask you, where does art come into this story?
Well, before I even got very sick, I had always used art as a way to cope with trauma. I had lost most of my family when I was younger, and I used art as a way to cope. And then I used it in my professional life. I taught in one of the 6 most dangerous neighborhoods at the height of the gang war. So we used art in my classroom as a way to cope with the losses that we had. In the middle of one of those shows that we were doing, one of my students was shot and killed. And so that became too much like art imitating life, or life imitating art. And I also used art as a way to help people when I was a hospital chaplain. I spent most of my time in the ICU and the emergency room. But I obviously felt like there was another more pressing group to help.
Right. So it's coming up for me again. So many messages. Honestly, you're speaking to so many people telling the story of trauma. We know that 100% of humans suffer from trauma. That could be something that came up from, their early years. It could be something that was suffered in their middle years. There's all ways, as now I've become a trauma-aware professional coach and being trauma-informed, that we can talk about trauma and define trauma for ourselves. But the thing that I want to get across here is everybody suffers from some kind of trauma. And the opportunity to use art as a healing tool for trauma is such an important one. I have one of my clients is a grief coach, and she's also an artist, and she also uses art in her work. So I want to ask you to hold up your book for me, because the best laid plans went awry and I suddenly don't have it. So hold it close in. And I want to show, this is the artwork that graces not just the cover of this book, but all the way through. And this is Evie's own artwork. Okay, thank you. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you came to the style of art that you used in the story and how it supports the learning modality?
Well, honestly, I felt a sense of urgency because I quickly realized that my personal story was very universal. And then my professional head came into sharp focus because you speak about trauma, and even though, my professional life was spent responding to pages, the minute that the helicopter would land in a level 2 trauma center where I worked, we didn't wait for the page. We just went straight to the emergency room. And, but I started being really alarmed when I realized that my story and the frustration that I encountered, it wasn't just the disease that I was dealing with or the complications of that, and it wasn't just dealing with my children's medical situation as a parent, but often the underwhelming lack of support, which isn't because people are malicious. It's because there are so many misconceptions surrounding disability, and we're all in a continuum, which is why I think my book speaks to many people. And those misconceptions are very powerful. And interestingly enough, I initially wrote it about the workplace because I first experienced my problems with my situation at the workplace. But then I quickly realized that people are surrounded by a very powerful, traumatizing lack of support that comes from many different avenues. So I devoted a chapter to each one of those. And I think I have strayed from your initial question.
No, I put my head in my hands because you just brought up something that is so important. First of all, talking about the urgency, it couldn't be more urgent. Secondly, the thing that you mentioned that I learned so much in your book was how traumatizing it is for the lack of support. There's something so many things I've learned, which is what answers the second question, which is why is your book worth my time to read? This always happens with my authors. I always end up answering that question because I didn't know what I didn't know. And also to look at you, you're beautiful, you're articulate, and nobody would ever know that you have stuff going on, underneath the surface in the background, and sometimes very much in the foreground with your condition. And most of us look around and we aren't in awareness of this, but we can grow in our awareness of being more of a support. It works. Sometimes that looks like giving a little bit more time. Sometimes that looks like giving a break. Sometimes that looks like, making adaptive strategies to support the person to be what they absolutely can be if you simply, create the opportunity for them. That's a big thing that really made your book worth my time. Was opening my mind and enlightening me through this cartoon style art that you've infused.
That was the question that I did not answer.
That's okay. That you've infused into the work that made it easy to read and made it fun-ish, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. And certainly a quick, easily able to, for me, the reader, to process and integrate, but really brought it in so deeply to understand that I really wanted to open my eyes and become an advocate.
Well, what you said actually kind of helped me answer your initial question, which is, well, there's two. One is why the style, why this style of illustration, I'm just flipping it open to a random page where I'm trying to keep my job over Christmas break, and I'm writing to someone I renamed Misconstrue in Human Resources. And the reason that I think that it's important that my book lands on people's shelves are about two powerful forces. And I want to give examples, and I also want to talk about those forces that we really underestimate. One, and they're both related, one is kind of a solution to the other. The first thing we underestimate is the traumatizing lack of support for chronic conditions, and what people are up against. And it's, again, simply because we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
In the same way that if somebody is missing in action, we are afraid to give that person, to acknowledge their grief, to send flowers. because we don't want to say, well, what if this is a forever thing, there's an unknown. So people are kind of in suspended animation. And one example of, I kind of analyzed, why is there this cultural dissonance with how to treat someone who has a chronic condition? We simply don't know how to support somebody in that situation. And one of the many myths I talk about in my book is that we have this false belief that if there's something seriously wrong, the doctor will easily identify it. And that is, I wish it was true. One of the things I discuss in my book is that there was a surgeon whose son had surgery. He wrote several books out of that experience. And he found, to his shock, that 40% of autopsies revealed a misdiagnosis as the cause of death. And for women, that becomes more pressing because our symptoms don't show up in the same way. Barbara Streisand is on a big campaign right now to raise awareness of heart disease. Just as a sidebar, I had a friend who is 13 years my junior. He complained of a irregular heartbeat, and he was given a 30-day monitor that day. I waited 5 years to get that test, and it would have made such a difference as a mother, as just a human being, to have treatment, which has been life-altering. That's one complication. And I'm going to get into some solutions in a minute. And, also autoimmune diseases are a big killer for women of all ages.
Huge. Yeah,
and
this is huge.
Huge. 3% of the National Institute of Health right now is devoted to studying this, even though it's the leading cause of death for women of all ages. But it's because they're listed separately on death certificates. So there's a real breakdown that people are experiencing. I want people to have this book. It started out as a trilogy, but I wanted people to have everything that they needed, because it is, to me, as urgent as any page I ever got. It's like a code blue for your human spirit. And I really believe that creativity, the redemptive power of creativity, will help you restore your dignity and your spirit. And that will make the difference in what kind of life chances you have.
I mean, honestly, I got my hands over my heart again. You use the word dignity. You use the word, your spirit. And also, it really is revealed about the life chances that you have when you are in dignity. And
go ahead.
I just cannot say enough how important this book is as a resource, because if you don't have to look, in spitting distance to find 5 of your women friends who have some kind of immunosuppressed situation going on, some kind of condition, some kind of this. People don't believe them. It's hard to describe. How you feel. You don't know what's going on, and living or then there's also pain, and living in that chronic pain. It's just absolutely unbearable. So let's get into the third question, which is, what do you want a reader to do after reading this book? You talked about some solutions.
Well, actually, I don't want them to ever really quite finish reading the book. I want it to be on a person's shelf, like a dictionary. But in this case, I would say the definition, what I want you to redefine really is yourself, because I've put about 10 years worth of, therapeutic, creative activities that help me survive. Because there was a time when I felt like my spark was about to be extinguished. Is that discouraging sometimes for people whose family members are coworkers our doctors and bosses may not understand. And a lot of people are living without a diagnosis. There's 7,000 rare diseases. People don't reach out. So number one, don't finish my book. Take it out again and again, because you can use it for years.
Right. There's tools in it. It's a journaling and survival guide. So there's tools and exercises embedded in a beautiful, fun way. Yeah, go ahead.
And it needs to be fun, because self-help shouldn't be a drag. Because, and the other thing too is to have two things to respect. One is to really begin to respect your own journey, even if there are times when no one else realizes how valiant you've had to be. A lot of times we don't look great when we're being valiant.
Yes.
And creativity is a different way to tell your story, because if you are trying to tell your story and have it honored and you're experiencing futility, the minute that you infuse imagination into it and change your story a little bit, give yourself a little permission to get fictitious and crazy, it is a shortcut. It's a pathway to your subconscious. You suddenly, well, I'm going to give an example from the book. I'm inviting people to get creative in how they tell their story. And in my book, the moon is my roommate. He goes by M Dog. And M Dog and I live together, as you know, and because I said that I only have the moon to talk to at night. And it turns out that he loses his moonlighting job, and the doctor is just like, well, it's just a job. But, the poignancy of the moon not being able to imagine another job that defines who he is as being in these constellations. And we all, have a constellation of activities that make us who we are. And so one of the exercises in the book is to, draw a map of those constellations and what pieces of the map are changing. I had a new respect for my own journey, to draw the moon. And when you respect your own story, you have the stamina to keep going to that fourth and fifth and seventh appointment that will make a difference. And what I want to say to readers, potential readers, is it's worth it to keep going. You're going to want to give up because you don't want to deal with one more doctor rolling their eyes at you, or you want to just shut up because your family just thinks maybe you're being a little dramatic because you have not yet been diagnosed with, in my case, a touch of heart failure and a few other complications. But one of the advantages that I had was that I had two beautiful children who were absolutely whole and beautiful. And that changed everything about the way I saw my own journey, because I was also protecting their dignity and wholeness as I was protecting my own. It became impossible to take on some of the difference in how to internalize that sense of inferiority that you can easily get. Because really this book is not, there's I think 12 or 13 chapters, and each one is dealing with a different source of resistance.
This is so important. Again, I want to take a moment to invite people either watching this on YouTube or listening to this to please like it, comment, follow, and most especially share it. This is coming live on my YouTube channel. If you're seeing this on my YouTube channel, please subscribe so that we can communicate messages like this out where they need to get to other, not just women, other people living with these conditions in futility, lacking support, and living in this perpetual sense of frustration, so that they can know that this resource is available to them. If you're following this on Facebook, please share this podcast, this video. If you're listening to this on Transformation Talk Radio, hello and welcome, friends. Please share this podcast further. So, Evie, we only have a few more minutes, which is really unfortunate. I'm going to have to begin to conceptualize how to do like part 2 with some authors, because there's so much deepness in this conversation. You're sharing your vulnerability, you're sharing your truth, and in so doing, you're leading, you're modeling all that can be. Just, I know sometimes, Evie, for you, it's hard to show up like this. Sometimes it is. I've learned that from you. Mm-hmm. And so I want to say thank you and ask you, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I think the easiest way to get in touch is through Facebook and through Instagram. I have a page called on Facebook, Chronic Valor, and also on Instagram, Chronic_Valor. Also, feel free to email me at evielennon779@gmail.com. And one thing I want to encourage people to do is to reach out to support groups, because when you're isolated, you take it personally. You feel like we all have different messages we take away, because as Susan said, we've all had past traumas. And so whatever negative messages you've received get reinforced. I literally wrote the book on this, and I still have to work really hard when I'm advocating for my daughter. My stepson has since been adopted by another family. But I still sometimes hit many obstacles. It's not your fault if you're getting resistance from the very people and institutions that you thought would support you, which is why it is so important to contact, the rare disease people, the orphan disease people, even if you don't have a diagnosis, which is the case with most people for years when they first become ill. And, race and gender certainly play into that as well, sadly. Reach out, because that sense of community will help you. And it doesn't mean that everybody in your community will say the right thing. One of the things I love to say as a chaplain is the one thing you can always count on in your worst moment is that somebody will say something stupid, and it's, oh I hope that encourages you as much as it encourages me to share it with you. And sometimes
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt to claim something, because we only have another minute or two. I would like to invite you, Evie, to join me in 2022, creating a monthly conversation on my Facebook page about how we open up and see people with chronic conditions, how we support them, how we love them, how we might offer tools from your book. We can do readings from your book. I think once a month maybe not be enough, but I know that we got to work within the energy that's available. And I think we should do that. I think we're going to pick a day and time. Are you in?
I'm in. I am in 100%.
We're doing that because I've learned from you the truth and the reality of the situation, especially with women with chronic conditions that people don't believe. And, it's very, very difficult. And there's so much more: traumatic brain injuries, abuse from the past, mental health concerns. There's so much more. I think that we can have 12 conversations in 2022 live.
And to support parents with kids who have chronic conditions, because I found it unbelievable that sometimes you would expect that children would receive some extra tenderness or credibility, and as a parent, you also have to be strong. So for all those people who are caregivers, or if you have a coworker and you're just not sure what to say,
we're gonna cover it all.
I'm
I'm gonna
so
talk to you.
excited.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about that offline right now. I got to shut down this conversation, but it's
30
not
minutes.
the end of the conversation. It seems like it's really only the beginning. I honestly have chills because I feel like this is a really divine idea that is divinely needed, especially at this time. So I want to thank you so much for showing up, for getting it together to be here, and for enlightening us. And we're going to continue this conversation, for a long time to come.
Well, Susan, I have to jump in and say thank you for being a person who walks the talk, because that willingness to learn, and you talk about empathy, you have changed my life and made me know what is possible as far as that communication. It's been extremely encouraging to be so seen and to be so heard. It has been a life changer.
Woo!
And you've helped me to step into my dignity, and I'm paying that forward.
Yeah, that's amazing. Great stuff. All right, friend. I'll be seeing you soon. Take good care.
Sounds great.
See you soon.